Welcome, everybody, to the DeFi Meets the World event. I'm here with Shingy from Asoba Defi, and we are really excited to bring you a day full of incredible speakers, panelists that we're going to chat. We're going to have some important conversations that have to do with clean energy, climate change, and how the blockchain affects that. So, first and foremost, Shingy, how are you, my friend? Glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Can everybody hear me okay?
You sound terrific.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited, everybody. Thanks for joining. I know this is going to be a long haul. Um, Maybe first introduce the high level goal of this session. The backdrop is COP27, which is happening in Egypt this year. For those of you that aren't familiar with COP27, it's the Congress of the Parties. It's essentially the UN's climate change task force or sort of annual conference. Countries come together at a different location every year to talk about global climate goals and measures that each country can individually take, as well as what the targets, what the strategies and what the goals are going to be collectively across the world. Part of the reason why I was motivated to have this event was a bit of frustration with some of the outcomes and the speed of change that we're seeing from COP. And what I mean by that is the countries that are participating, the countries in the UN, we see number one that we had initially made a goal in Paris in 2016, COP21. This was a commitment across the world, theoretically, to address global temperature change. The target was to put a ceiling on the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius over the next 50 years. And that's essentially based on the climate science. That's essentially the maximum amount that we can allow global temperatures to raise without starting to see catastrophic impacts on society as we know it. Um, Fast forward 5 years later at COP26, and we're seeing that very few countries have even upheld the very, very low bar of creating a national strategy for actually accomplishing their individual portion of that goal. So we see an extreme lack of urgency on the part of countries around the world to actually do this. And what's terrifying is that the billions of people that aren't participating at the table of these conversations, that have absolutely no say in these conversations, but are impacted in every possible way by those conversations, we're sitting and kind of watching a slow motion car crash or a slow motion fall into a wall, and there's not much we can do. But that's where I think the promise of blockchain and Web3 comes in, because there actually is something that we can do. There actually is a mechanism by which we can channel trillions of dollars worth of capital without the tight control of a central banking system, without the tight control of status quo powers that do not have that kind of urgent incentive to actually make life better and easier for the average person. And I think that's reinforced in what we're seeing from central banks across the world and their response to the inflation that we're seeing. Instead of allocating capital urgently towards building the infrastructure that we absolutely need to address climate change, right? And that investment is trillions of dollars worth of investment, from clean energy to carbon sequestration to forest preservation to animal conservation to clean water. There's so many things across all aspects of human life that are asking for investment in order to get us to a point where we are much less uh, emitting of greenhouse gases. But instead, what central banks are doing are attacking your ability to buy things. They're basically saying that the way that we beat inflation is by making sure more people are unemployed and making sure that more people don't have wage rises. I mean, the federal government is asking employers to not give people raises right now, like literally asking employers to do this, right? There is no recognition of the incredible amounts of agency, moral dilemmas that have been created by large financial actors like banks, et cetera, and the number of financial crashes that we're seeing, like the financial crash that we're seeing over the last 10 months, the financial crash in 2008, the financial crash in 2003, it was the same picture over and over again, right? It's large institutional players who are essentially de-risked by the central bank and by government to get super cheap money. They borrow super cheap money to invest in high risk assets. And when those investments implode inevitably, everybody else is left holding the bag and these folks get bailed out. So we're seeing that the people that are actively causing these problems, who are in control of the financial system and in control of assets and fiat currencies, there is no sense of responsibility guiding their behaviors. There's no sense of accountability that's acting as a deterrent for engaging this kind of risk behavior. And so, if we're to use that world as the guidance, I don't think we're going to accomplish the things we need to from a greenhouse gas emission prevention or a global temperature um, a global temperature increase mitigation. And so this is where I think again, where blockchain and Web3 really have promise and allow us multiple opportunities to kind of escape that web. And so what we're doing in this event is we're bringing on experts across the board, experts in tokenization of carbon credits, experts in ESG and governance, experts in clean energy, experts across the board, in experts in financing, using blockchain as financing, to kind of talk about what they're doing, to answer some deeper questions about where are the opportunities, where do they see the opportunities, what is their thesis, and how do we navigate this world now where we're seeing a lot of implosion of all the sort of high promise, big talking, huge returns promising projects from last year that were kind of hailed as like the darlings of the crypto world. And every single one of them, every single one of those darlings has been shown to be a charlatan and a fraud, with absolutely no sense of governance, without any sense of accountability to their investors. And so, these are projects that are presenting a different picture of crypto, a picture where, hey, these are asset-backed projects. These are projects that are investing in the real economy. This isn't about just pure yield farming and like, throwing your money to some project who promises 30% returns without giving you any justification of where it comes from. These are all real projects doing real things in the real economy that are specifically targeted around some aspect of climate change. And so again, this is just to showcase that this space is not full of frauds. Like this space has a lot of subject matter experts, not finance bros and tech bros meeting together and getting VC money to run scams, but like real people that have science backgrounds, that have engineering backgrounds, that have some form of entrepreneurship, innovative backgrounds that are leveraging Web3 in really creative ways, in tokenized ways, in financially sustainable ways, in transparent ways, in accountable ways to help make the world better. So that's the goal. Hopefully, we walk away from this event with some kind of industry-wide pledge or target that we can look at for 2023. My hope is by this time next year, we'll have this kind of event in person, hopefully in Zanzibar. That's kind of the plan right now, to talk about where we were at this point now and how things have changed over the 12 months. And hopefully there are more attendees as well. Hopefully there are also more people that are not in the crypto space, but part of the real economy. So not just finance people, but also people that are in energy, in engineering, in manufacturing, and seeing how, hey, there are alternative ways of procuring finance, of ensuring governance, of transparency, of accountability, of auditing. That it's not just about Bitcoin and to the moon and like pumps and all that kind of nonsense, but there's like real stuff. And this is more about bypassing the blockers that traditional banks have, and the incentives, the misaligned incentives that banks have to like allocate capital where it actually makes the biggest effect or impact from a climate perspective. So that's the goal for today. I know that was very long-winded, but I want to just like really make it clear that there high stakes. It doesn't seem like it. It seems kind of casual because we're all on Discord, on audio. It seems casual, but this is a really big deal. This is the start. All the big the big institutions, the new wealth that gets created. It all gets created during this time of the market, during the recessionary time when all the nonsense and the fat gets trimmed, and you have a controlled burn. The wildfire kind of clears out all the dead wood, and you have fertile ground once all that fire is kind of cleared out. That's like the stage we're at right now, where the fire is kind of clearing the dead wood out, and what's remaining are projects that have strong seeds, that have strong growth potential, and are actually creating roots in something real. So, hopefully that gives you a clear sense. Jimbo, what are your takeaways? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you said a couple things that really got me thinking, and I do want to touch back on kind of that redistribution of wealth, or even just the distribution of wealth via the blockchain, and the simplicity of that, and kind of how that's helping push a lot of like social incentives and stuff like that, in the right direction. But I want to back up just a little bit about a key word I heard you say, and I think it's like a word that resonates with a lot of people right now for many different ways, is frustration. uh,
Mm,
you're frustrated. We're frustrated. I would even go as far as saying we're pissed off. And
mhm,
something that in throughout history that I've seen personally, studying history, is frustration leads to innovation in so many different senses. And I feel like there's, dig deep into my family roots. My father's a heating and cooling guy, and he's an efficient human being. And every time he'd get frustrated at his job, he said he loved it because he'd figured out a new way to solve something in a unique way. And it just gets me thinking. I wanted to hear your thoughts on just like how we harness this frustration to have the ability to lead into innovation.
Yeah, that's a challenging one because I think that there are a few responses to frustration you can have, right? One is like the innovation response, which is like, okay, your mind immediately goes to solutions. You have another response, which is essentially to like throw a tantrum. And I think what is getting the most platform right now, at least in the West and Europe and the United States, are people that are throwing tantrums. They're doing really weird stuff like, splashing oil on expensive paintings or like trashing milk cartons in grocery stores and stuff like that. Um, or going to like that what happened a couple weeks ago, where the protests at the Dutch airport, preventing private jets from flying. So that's one response that we're seeing right now. That's getting a lot of cheerleading, which is essentially just like throwing a tantrum because they're frustrated, um, and demanding that governments, the how dare you, governments need to do better. And then there's a response of just like doing nothing or even being in denial. And we're seeing that a lot as well. I think a lot more of those last two than we're seeing of the first one. Um, but people in the blockchain space, especially in the climate side of things, are builders, and more than just builders, because I think there are a lot of engineers, software engineers, for example, that are builders. Um, but more than just builders, there are a lot of people that have subject matter expertise. So like they're coming from some industry where they see that a change could be made, and they don't see any of the traditional channels solving that problem. And so they see Web3 and blockchain as a tool that they can use to innovate on to be able to solve that problem. And I think those are the people that are going to create, the solutions that we're going to be turning to in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you talk about like throwing the paint on the paintings and stuff like that, of the frustration of these younger generations, right? That maybe have not had that training or that experience in life to understand how to necessarily harness those emotions. And I speak from the same standpoint. Like I feel like I haven't had the outlet the government is supposed to give you to allow you to fairly express your emotions and have them be heard. And so I'm curious what you think on, obviously this is a linear thing, right? Where we're at a certain point in, we'll call it the climate crisis timeline of reaction, right? We're reacting a certain way. Obviously, I'm sure you can attest, and this is why we're having this event and why you're so passionate in these fields, is we're behind. I don't believe we're where we should be in that timeline. Do you have any idea of like what you would like to see be done? Not necessarily specifics, but obviously, like, you talk about these frustration lash outs, and obviously everybody always goes, myself included, points to the positive and says, well, at least they're talking about it now. But Shingi, we're so far from where we need to be if we're just still talking about it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure people were on the Titanic while it sank talking about it, right? Like there's a certain point where um, you needed to have gotten off the ship. and actually done something. And that's I think that's where I will always be a little bit critical, not like on an individual standpoint, but certainly painting a broad brush, very critical of the kind of climate activism that we're seeing in the West, um, because like I actually don't know if at this stage more conversations are doing us any good. I think it actually might be worse because I think what I'm seeing is like if you have lots of conversations about a really bad problem, like one that is has the potential to like destroy the world, the life as you know it, um, and all you're doing is talking about it, what are you really talking about? Like you're basically just like voicing your anxieties, voicing your frustrations, voicing your anger, voicing your depression. But if you don't have an understanding of what potential solutions there are, more talking just kind of gets you more and more stuck in a certain headspace. And the way most people work is that like we look for news that confirms our biases. If we feel that we're doomed, like that's all the content that we're going to consume. And Twitter makes it, and YouTube, and all these like algorithmic content curators make it really easy to get stuck in that mindset. And they don't really do a good job of discoverability um, of act not even answers of just like actual tools that you can use to kind of figure out or think through like what you can actually do. So I mean, I agree with you. Like just talking about it, I don't know at this stage. Like we're off the pace. We're way off the pace. Like I think right now we're on pace for like 2.4 degrees Celsius. Like that's like basically if we keep on the current trajectory for another few years, like that's best case scenario. Like we've blown past the 1.5-degree scenario. So we basically guaranteed ourselves some form of like permanent alteration or destruction. And we still have people that are kind of fighting it or playing these games of like again platforming people that are just like sowing confusion. And that's the piece that I don't really, you know, I don't get why that's happening. But the other side of me says, okay, maybe that doesn't really matter. Like there are things that I can do, and I'm just going to do them until like death comes or until a better you know the a better place happens. Like one of those two things are going to happen, but stressing out about it doesn't really change those outcomes or the fact that those outcomes are going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a very progressive style of thinking, honestly. It's just clearing your mind, so control what you can control. This is the old saying that I was taught when I was younger, and you're so we're so distracted by the amount of information out there, amount of tools and all that, that it's easy to kind of get lost in the sauce of how do we actually help? What is the most efficient way to help? And what's interesting is you kind of said it, you kind of nailed it. Is I think chaos sells. We've seen that in our media and our news and Western civilization since the media started. Is that chaos sells,
Yep.
fear sells, stuff like that, and that is what those companies run off of. Is they're profiting off of the idea of scaring you because that raises your excitement level and makes you pay attention more. So I'm curious how you think that kind of and this is kind of what I want to chat about it because it's an overall message of this entire event is there's obviously climate change deniers, right? There's obviously this huge like kind of movement going around in the background of saying that we're fine, the earth is fine, this is all propaganda, or this is all whatever conspiracy. Understanding that we live in a world where it's hard to trust anything, right? After COVID, after all this, you have so many different opinions versus the science, right? And I think that a lot of that relates to that chaos cells. Oop, sorry about that.
I,
Give me
I still
one
hear you.
second, so sorry.
Okay.
I have a technical issue. My bad. And sorry about that. And but basically you know, I'm just curious that relation you think between, chaos selling and the climate deniers. What is your thought on kind of how we stop that train, or is it even worth addressing, or how do you feel about that?
Well, I think the way that I see that sort of whole thing playing is that I put myself in the shoes of somebody because I used to play a lot of like games like Civilization and SimCity, And in those games, you're not constrained to always be the good guy, if you get what I'm saying. So it's like sometimes you'll play and you'll do a villain run in one of these kinds of games. Um, and so I think about that and I put myself in the shoes of like, okay, if I was a billionaire who just like whose goal was really just to like get power at all costs, what are some of the things that I would do? And I think, for example, just looking at the US context, a government, specifically Congress, so that's our legislative body, that's politically at gridlock would actually be a dream scenario for me, right? It's one that cannot effectively make policy change. And policy change that does happen has like severe amounts of compromise and heavy involvement from lobbying and other sort of political rent seeking. Like that's a perfect environment for me because when you have Congress that's gridlocked, that means it cannot respond quickly to any kind of big moves that you make. So that's like one arm of it. Then the other arm is then you also distract like the population, right? You get people like caught up in irrelevant shit. So, for example, that's why you have the oil heiress that is financing some of these like direct action climate activist groups who are throwing oil on paintings and doing other like really juvenile stuff in public and acting as if it's some sort of big thing. But what if like what she really did was just like get a bunch of like mentally unstable people, and her goal was to use them as essentially useful idiots to distract the public. So the media, because again, as you pointed out, discord, no pun intended, sells. Um, Confusion sells, drama sells. So you distract everybody by like thinking that climate activism is really just like a bunch of these clownish teenagers with god complexes and like in delusions of grandeur, and you think that that's the thing. So you get the public all sort of obsessed about that thing, and then you quietly make small moves here, small moves there that don't make it into the media because people are paying attention to the bigger things like the what crazy thing this climate activist group did, or what crazy thing this vegan group did in Netherlands, that kind of thing. So all of those things, like as I'm thinking about it from a perspective of someone who has entrenched interests in fossil fuel or status quo, like those are the kinds of things that I'd be doing to like ensure that I'm able to make moves, like my actual moves, without people knowing what I'm doing. So with that in mind, I don't think that there's anything that we the public can do directly to like directly counteract that or to like block or oppose that. I think the things we do are creating alternative systems because capital and wealth is not zero sum. You can create new wealth from nothing, by manufacturing new product, by creating new currencies, by creating new stores of value, et cetera. So you can absolutely create alternative systems, and the beauty is that, it's challenging to stop it when it's happening in a decentralized manner. And as long as the tools exist and as long as, the blockchain and the technology itself exists, it does, any individual project, it doesn't really matter. I think some are going to grow really big, but it's not about the individual projects. It's about the rails, if you will, of a space like blockchain, allowing capital to move efficiently to where it needs to go. And, people in the public who are interested in these kinds of things have the opportunity to invest in and capitalize projects that are actually doing accountable things. Then the last piece is that that's up to the individual investors to to have the right priorities. Because I think in the last year, a lot of investors really focused on like what is the highest yield that I can get. I'm going to put my life savings into Wonderland Time, or I'm going to put my life savings into Olympus, or what have you, because they're promising 4-digit APY. So haha, let me see if I can YOLO into that. We gotta educate investors and show investors that yeah, like every time you see that, there's an FTX at the end of that tunnel, or there's a Terra Luna at the end of that tunnel, right? There's just like you getting ripped off, and maybe somebody running off into the sunset with billions of consumer dollars. But steering people instead towards projects where yeah, this is not going to be 500% APY. There might be some yield on this, but like the yield that you're really going to get, and besides like the modest yields you get financially, is the climate impact that these projects are going to have. So that's where I think that just the focus needs to be is like there's nothing you can do to stop those other things that we're talking about, like the folks in the UN, the World Economic Forum type folks, Like, there's nothing you can do to stop that. What you can do is create alternatives that are so easy for people to onboard, that have accountability and transparency, so that it doesn't require the SEC. It doesn't. There's no rationalization or justification for the SEC to come and like throw the ban hammer on people. Like it's already responsibly stewarded. I think that's the approach that we need to take.
Yeah, I could agree more. And when you, it's just so interesting that you say about, obviously the FTX, the end of it is, you're so right, because that wealth of investor capital is gone in a sense, because whether it's going to stay in that person's bank account and in other assets, or go back to the federal government when he hopefully gets arrested, neither here nor there. But it's gone, and it's robbed, and you rob the people. And I think that's such a huge point to make, is that when we as a society or as a community of Web3 celebrate these fake influencers, or these people that we think are gonna 100 times our money and stuff, and then they end up being the rug. It's not just your money you've lost, which is damning, but it's a collective of resources that are now burned, right? And I think that it's really interesting to talk about that distribution of wealth and how we can try to manipulate that distribution of wealth via the blockchain. And like you said, I just think it's so smooth to be able to do that. And I think that it's very interesting when you talk about the redistribution of wealth to even Web3, when all the people did make that crazy Bitcoin money, Ethereum money, and stuff like that. We now have an ability or an opportunity to really use that wealth redistribution to save the planet. Is that kind of what we're looking at here?
Yeah, and I think wealth redistribution can sometimes sound like a dirty word, especially in sort of Western audiences who are kind of used to this whole capitalism versus communism kind of dichotomy. Um, but I prefer to see it as like when you invest in a small business, you redistribute wealth, right? You take the wealth that you've earned and generated, you invested in a business. That business is taking those dollars to hire people, those people who may not have had a job otherwise, or who may have been, you know, their employment options may have been much more limited, especially if you're investing in small business in Tanzania or in Zimbabwe. And you end up helping create stability in a household, in a family that didn't have it. So that's like one whole generation that's going to grow up with a completely different trajectory because of your investment. And the beauty of it is that it still comes back to you. Like, yeah, there's like the whole pat yourself on the back, feel good thing, but we're not. Humans are not altruists. When we do it, there's a what's in it for me in every action we take. But that's the beauty of financial systems and commerce, is that like it creates win-wins. Like, wealth is not zero sum. I invest in you, I share my wealth with you so that you can do something with it and create wealth for yourself, and you return some of it back to me. Like, and I get my principal plus interest, or I get if I'm holding a security of some sort, or a stock or a share in your business, then like I can sell it to somebody else and get liquidity that way. Like, you know, we and that's what I was talking about in terms of making the guardrails really easy, because right now, like, access to the kinds of investment structures that really do create wealth are pretty limited to people that are accredited investors, which means that you need to make over, is it 400K household, or have a net worth of over $1 million, right? That effectively excludes 99% of the population from investing in other people, right? And what are your investment options in the United States? You have some additional investment options. You can invest in stocks, bonds, etc. But if you're in Argentina, or if you're in Zimbabwe, or if you're in another global South country, you don't have access to all of these different asset classes to like store your wealth. Like, you're basically stuck with a local currency in a bank account that's like highly volatile, or under the mattress if you're afraid of like the bank not being able to get your deposit back. And that's just that's, you can't create wealth like that. The only way to create wealth is by increasing the velocity of money, is by each dollar or each unit of currency you have has to touch as many people as possible, because that's how you move wealth around, is by investing, reinvesting, bringing and including more people into the group so that more people are, have tools to create stuff and have structures in which to create them. And that's how we all get lifted up is by everybody participating in this. And the only way everyone can participate is if everybody has access to capital. And again, that's again where blockchain comes in, is because it presents us with a way of allowing liquidity to move literally like water across borders to whomever needs it, wherever they need it in an instant. Whereas, right now, liquidity is even dollars can be very illiquid if you're trying to, invest from the United States into a country like Zimbabwe. And I'm saying that from firsthand experience because I have tried to invest in solar in Zimbabwe, but it's incredibly challenging because of how difficult it is to move dollars across borders. Um, so, I think that's kind of where I see and how I see redistribution really playing out, or how I sort of frame it from a blockchain standpoint.
Yeah, on a national level, that's I'm gonna tell you right away, Shingy, on a national level, that is something I wouldn't in my wildest dreams even think would be a fork in the road or like a roadblock. That's not even something that would go through my head to say moving money across international borders is difficult and the blockchain solves that instantly. That
Yeah.
it's a wild concept. And so has this ever happened to your knowledge before? Anything like this ever happened before? Is this like a major roadblock that's being, we have a detour finally?
Yeah, I mean, you said it earlier. It's kind of a linear progression, right? We started with hard currency, which was essentially like literal gold or silver pieces. We moved from that to essentially IOUs, like the Bank of England and sort of the UK, and that development of currency. From there, we went off the gold standard onto, I guess a more digital, essentially dollars, like a digital ledger. I mean, this is kind of like the next evolution of that, which is like there's a technology framework for that digital ledger, which includes, automated contracts. So all of those things that you require, courts for and complex legal systems for, we've essentially like boiled that all down to software within the blockchain. So yeah, I think it is unprecedented. But I think it's also incremental improvement. I think that's where, you know, I get annoyed by Bitcoin maxis because they treat Bitcoin as like the thing, and I'm just like, it's super culty, man. Like at the end of the day, it's a currency, not a particularly good one for using as a medium of exchange, but it's a currency. Um, all of these tokens, that we're going to talk about throughout this event, and outside of the climate space, they're all attempts at storing value under some type of contract on some specific chain, which has its own technical methods of handling scale and handling transactions and all of that, right? It's like, it's this whole operating system for currency that doesn't involve any people. And I think that's amazing. Like that's incredible, because you know the real like the I think like the biggest use case for blockchain right now isn't in the first world, so to speak. The biggest use cases, I mean, because we see most of the use cases that we're developing here, because there are no real problems that we're trying to solve here in the US. Or I mean there are, but that's not where the capital is going. It's going into just like yield farming, and it's going into just like trading derivatives and doing Wall Street bets YOLO stuff. But if you get out of the United States, you go to a country like El Salvador, right, or countries like Venezuela, where they've had extreme issues with managing their own currency. They've had extreme issues with like debt monetization and all of that. And governments have basically just said, "Hey, look, we're not good at this. Government is not good at managing this currency. So instead of having government run that, we're going to trust the blockchain, which is essentially theoretically some neutral party that's enforcing all of this. There is no bias to it. Well, there is, but not in the same human way that we see political bias now. Um, and we're seeing that people now have opportunities to store their wealth that they did not have before in those global south types of settings. So, I I would encourage people, I probably don't need to tell the audience here because I think there are a lot of people here that are from developing countries, but like especially in the West, like people that think of crypto as only as a scam, like it's down to a lack of imagination. And it's also down to just a lack of exposure to the financial challenges that people around the world face that you don't even think about in the United States or in Europe, unless you're really poor there.
It's I think that's like part of the entire challenge is helping with the bridge of communication between all the different countries, cultures, dialects. This is a global conversation, and there aren't many of those that have been so important. I don't think that obviously war and famine, but the climate will dictate all of that. So, it's just this feel of it being almost too serious to like, is it really this serious? Like, yes, it is. And I'm so excited that we put together this event to kind of talk about that. And so I do wanted to get just a minute to give you to go over the speakers today and kind of talk a little bit about the schedule and what we're going to dive into.
Yeah. So we have a lot of really heavy hitters in the climate Web3 space. So just kind of walk it through the schedule. So after this portion, we're going to have our first expert panel. We're going to be joined by Yi Luo and Climadao. They're going to talk about governance within the Web3 space. Next, we're going to have Moss Earth. So you might have heard of them. They are a carbon offset. They tokenize carbon offsets. They're based out of Brazil. It's kind of crazy. Part of that team, part of their leadership team, are on the ground at COP27, which is pretty cool. They've done a lot of incredible things within the tokenization of carbon credit space, particularly within South America and Latin America. We're going to have a member of that team join us. After that, we're going to have an expert panel. We'll be joined by Brave New DAO as well as Tony Tu. So Brave New DAO, they do blockchain financing for like clean energy projects and other climate related projects. Tony Tu is the head of renewables in Africa. He not only is he a clean energy developer, but he also creates a lot of educational content that talks about clean energy in Africa and all the multi dimensions around that. Then we'll have some music. We'll have another AMA. I think the attendee is Flux. Right now, I think we're changing. We did have Big Five, but they weren't able to make it, so we may have another project from the Flow blockchain join us that's related to climate. We'll follow that with another DJ set, little sort of evening party for those of you that are in the UK. Then we're going to be joined after that by Carbon Base. So they are another sort of ESG focused blockchain group that's based out of East Asia. I believe that they're in Hong Kong. After that, they'll be followed by the Regen Foundation, as well as, and I'm going to get this, let's see if I get the acronym correct. It is the Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Offset Working Group. So it's Regen Foundation and this working group, represented by one person. There's a lot of intersection between these groups. So they're going to talk about what they're working on. There are a lot of projects that fit underneath the umbrella there. So with just those two projects, there are dozens of other projects that are represented in terms of different efforts across the board, from a climate innovation perspective, as well as from a geographic perspective. After that, we're gonna have some giveaways. So we'll be doing some giveaways of some Asoba NFTs. There'll also be a big old giveaway, I believe, of a solar charger. Jimbo can kind of give more details about that. It's gonna be super exciting. Then we're gonna have our last expert panel will be joined by ESG DAO, as well as Climate Collective, and that'll be at 6 a.m. in the UK, and what is that Pacific time? 10 p.m. Pacific time. And then after that, we'll have our closing remarks, and we'll talk about some of the potential pledges that we've kind of hinted at over the course of the event, and what are some of the things that we can look forward to over 2023, and sort of more concrete targets that we can nail over 2023. So yeah, that's the schedule of events for today that we have planned. It's going to be 12 hours of a lot of really deep thinking and innovation talk.
Yeah, and that's why I'm really excited that we can bring a little bit of fun to it too, because I'm curious about what you think about the philosophy. I talked about this a bunch, and it's people get burned out from being revolutionaries, for being activists and stuff like that. I mean, it burns you out. Even though it's necessary and needed, it's and we're at crisis mode. It's almost like a sports analogy that you could use, that if you play, 50 minutes in the basketball game, are you as effective as if you would have played, 40 minutes more hardcore? That whole argument of balance, work-life balance, but we'll call it activism life balance, right? And that's why I like to relax with the games and the music, because this is going to be some deep talks. This is going to be some important stuff, and I really am excited to dive into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just looking at a graph of the difference between your brain waves when you have like four back to back to back meetings versus taking breaks in between those meetings. And like it's a pretty huge difference in terms of like level of stress between those two. And especially, yeah, these are serious topics that this is of fighting for our lives, so to speak. And we need to we need to have a level of urgency, but you're absolutely right. Like you need to get some sleep, you need to relax, you need to have fun, like let your hair down, so to speak. And so yeah, we're just hoping to combine the work and the play together.
Yeah, and just enjoy what we're trying to save. I mean, and that's the conundrum I find myself in a lot, Shingy, is when you're an activist or a revolutionary in a sense, and you're fighting the good fight. I can only speak from my experience, and some of my close brothers and sisters that are knee deep in the actual, activism, is don't forget to enjoy what you're trying to save, because at the end of the day, the reason we're trying to save it is because life is so damn beautiful, and the world has the potential to be the literal heaven on earth that they wrote about in the books, the knowledge books, we'll call them, and whatever religion or philosophy you follow. We have an opportunity to follow to create this paradise, but it starts with stopping the opposite from happening first.
Yep.
And there's an incredible speech. I'm not sure if you ever, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Emma. I would assume you probably heard of it. The Great Dictator speech, Charlie Chaplin.
Yes. Yeah.
Gosh, it's one of I'm getting chicken skin or like goosebumps when I talk about it, but it's one of my all-time philosophical leading videos of him just saying, for those of you who've never seen it, go watch it. It's an incredible video. If someone wants to link it, I'll link it in a minute if no one does. But it's called the last dictator speech, and it's Hitler, and Charlie Chaplin plays Hitler, and he talks for the first time in his cinematic career, and it's this incredible speech that if Hitler was just a good guy and he like didn't care about all the the hatred and stuff, and so he gives this speech, this talks, it's so encouraging about how we have what we need here. The earth is plentiful, but greed of man has misdirected us, and it's time we put our foot down. And this video is so old, but it still rings true today. So, I'm so inspired by the efforts of some of the people that are going to be talking with us today. I'm really excited for the rest of this event. And with that being said, Shingy, unless you have something else you wanted to share, I figure we give a little bit of break with some music before we dive into our first expert panel.
That sounds good to me.
Well, thanks everybody for showing up. There's more than I thought was even going to come. I'm really excited to have a lot of you in the audience. Again, we really want to focus on just bringing this content out and having a center space for knowledge and learning, less about everyone having to make it live and be here in the moment. So I appreciate you coming. I hope you learned something today. In the meantime, enjoy the project tents down there in green resources. We have all those projects that have put their information. Take the next 15 minutes or so, listen to some music and look into some of these projects. And we'll be back in about 15 minutes to start our first expert panel. Thanks everybody for coming.
Take time. You say good things take time, don't you, girl? Waste time. You don't wanna waste time, don't you, girl? To make this last, I know one thing, the things go fast. I know two things, the good don't last. I know three things, I love your laugh. One look at you, I forget my past. One look at you, I forget I'm trash. If I lose you, I'ma get you back. If I lose you, I'ma get you. And that's just facts. Love to think about the times we had. Love to think about the times we had. More to come as long as this lasts. But knowing me, the things will end up bad. Seem to mess up all the things I had. Try my best, but still I come right back. Try my best, but still I come right. Take time. you say good things take time, don't you, girl? Waste time.